Look, people are talking about NVIDIA. There's a nice deal this morning with Cisco. I think it's actually much more important than people realize. Cisco is the first to qualify. It's going to be a real partnership, and that's Chuck Robbins working closely with Jensen. But there is an overwhelming sense that this market keys on NVIDIA at a moment when we have no idea what the federal government's going to do to NVIDIA. So the federal government...
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, they literally might just say, you know what, we're going to block NVIDIA, not just the low-end NVIDIA, but everything NVIDIA. I had Lam on, and I had a KLA on, and they've already taken the big hit. They can take another hit.
Block as in prevent exports?
No, block and say, listen, you're not going to get anything from the United States. They get a huge amount of...
Wait, who?
NVIDIA. NVIDIA, big export market, China. Are they going to take it away?
Right, but that's the low-end chips.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that maybe the government says... How do you know that the government doesn't say no more low-end chips?
Oh, no, I don't.
Because if you add a lot of low-end...
I just wanted to clarify what it is you're referring to.
I'm talking about you have a company that reports, and maybe they're not in control of their forecast. And the forecast has been very important.
No, but you spent a lot of time talking about the Biden administration's ruling in the very end of the Biden administration and how deleterious that was to NVIDIA, and now you're talking about this as still a possibility?
Well, because the Biden administration was quite content with having the lowest end chips go to China. Maybe this administration and this issue, perhaps led by Peter Navarro, says nothing. You get nothing.
Well, meantime, there's a Reuters piece today that H20 orders are higher because a lot of these Chinese firms are trying to leverage the DeepSeek model.
Well, how about if they ban H20? We don't know.
And just to point out, H20 is sort of that
low end. That's like instead of the H200.
We're now at H200, so you can kind of figure out where.
Yeah, it's not a Tinker Toy versus a Caterpillar, but it is without a doubt something that had passed muster with the previous administration because it was not really thought to be capable of military.
Meanwhile, yesterday, about this time, we were talking about Microsoft's CapEx plans. We do have a piece now where Microsoft says we may strategically adjust our spending and infrastructure, right?
No, they're sister, mother at this point. I don't know what the hell's going on.
I listened to Nadella did that long podcast. Of course, all these CEOs now, they just sit down for hours with people you've never heard of, answering very nice, friendly questions. It's great.
You've never heard of. Yeah. Well, how about if you were?
Did you? I didn't know. I mean, maybe a lot of people knew. What's his name?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Huge internet presence?
I don't know. No, they're very well viewed and watched and listened to.
Well,
but he was. I mean, it's actually worth listening to, and I did listen to much of it last night. But you're right, Carl. I mean, within that there was some, and we've already referenced it yesterday. Nadella talking about sort of scale and how important that is, and it won't be winner take all. There are lots of potential winners, but also talking a little bit about the idea of over time scaling back.
But just to go back to how I started with this, look, NVIDIA is the stock that people say is the biggest battleground, and there are people who think it's dramatically overvalued, and I don't get that. One of the things I've asked them, I put the questions to them. You have a thing tomorrow where you actually can ask the CFO some things, and I don't have to
collect press.
Collect press. But I said, look, I need to know what kind of you have You have this concentration of 5 customers. Maybe I want the pastiche, if not mosaic, of what Apple has. Mm-hmm. Maybe I want billion customers.
Well, that's not going to happen.
Well, no, of course not. It's rhetorical.
I understand.
So are you worried about tomorrow night or not?
Yes.
You are?
I am.
Oh, all right. I wouldn't have picked that up.
I am worried because I think it really turned out to be that hard to make Blackwell. And we do know, by the way, that Blackwell, that Dell's got a good relationship, and some micro of HPE was late. But if I'm not, I mean, I'm looking at the government. I thought the government was off the table.
Well, there's
Why do you feel like, sorry to interrupt, why do you feel like it is on the table?
Because the stories this morning said it was on the table.
You got in some
because I made it up. I had a nightmare.
Has Navarro sent you some coded message? What's going on?
Let's just find out. Enough with your guesswork.
And we'll get on the phone with Navarro and figure out whether tomorrow they're gonna. No, I mean, I'm just to Carl's point. You're worried. You're bringing up the government for the first time in a while in terms of even this idea of banning the lowest end chips in China.
Well, I mean, look, let's understand.
Where's that coming from?
They say that they're going to do more, okay? Well, what is there to do more? They've already restricted almost everything. They send them the lowest end chips. They obviously still can use those. That's it, okay? Right. And they've restricted, and I don't know, look, remember the Biden administration on the Saturday night before they ended, they had 18
that's what
countries?
I was referring to, yes.
But I'm just saying that, I feel confident that NVIDIA has a good business model, but I don't know whether, if the government says, listen, we're not going to let you sell chips to all the countries that he just did a charm tour to. Look at you, if you're not worried.
No, listen, and to Carl's point and the story, DeepSeek did manage to do something that is relatively competitive with others with H20s, meaning you can do a lot with them.
But you saw the video
creative.
About Jensen saying that it's really post-training and that this is very good.
Yes.
And what'd you think?
What did I think of what?
The post-training video.
I think inference is going to be what it's all about, right?
And post-train and inference.
But I also thought that they did show, in terms of reinforcement learning, mixture of experts, the things that they used at DeepSeek, which are obviously available to those who also have similar products here and are known, is a way to both potentially not use as much compute power and power.
It doesn't work for humanoid.
Get a lot out of it.
It doesn't work for humanoid. It doesn't work for video. It doesn't work for self-driving.
Right, so now you're speaking in favor of NVIDIA and all the reasons why chip sales are going to continue to be quite strong.
I am speaking in favor of NVIDIA. It doesn't mean I'm not worried about the quarter.
Okay.
Look, what does the government mean when it says it has to crack down more? The government was cracking down so severely on these guys that I'm shocked that they have to crack down more.
That's right. Bloomberg is reporting today that the Trump administration is eyeing even tougher restrictions on semiconductor exports to China than the recent Biden administration had put in place, and those were seen as tough at the time. Citing people familiar with the matter, Bloomberg reports that the Trump administration officials are holding meetings now to discuss new limits with key U.S. allies and working on a longer list of restrictions that could be put in place in the coming months. Now, the goal here is to slow China's overall technological progress, and especially so in sensitive areas like artificial intelligence. The Trump team is looking at 3 specific possibilities: curbs on sales of chips that NVIDIA designed specifically for China, reducing the computing power that can be exported without a license, and putting more restrictions on types of NVIDIA chips that can be exported without a license.
Well, those looming U.S. restrictions you just talked about are expected to keep NVIDIA's guidance in check, since they would tighten measures on GPU, or we can call them AI, chip sales to China. Morgan Stanley, just one example of sell-side research that bets NVIDIA's April Q1 guidance may not be as grand as everyone hoped, but should still move up at least an average of $2 billion, so not bad. And that's because NVIDIA still sells export-compliant AI chips to China. They're called the H20s. The success of China's DeepSeek large language model has caused really a surge in H20 orders just over the last month for customers like Tencent and Alibaba. The assumption, though, and this assumption has been going on for a while, that's why this may not necessarily be new news, is that these chips would be the next to be restricted, which explains why NVIDIA has been so vocal about the potential damage, saying, quote, in a blog post, these rules would do nothing to enhance U.S. security. The administration worries China, though, has been circumventing the rules that are already in place, going through Singapore or buying on the secondary market. It's hard to stop when a quick eBay search, which I did this morning, will show NVIDIA Hoppers that you're seeing on your screen selling at about $29,000 a piece. NVIDIA has a relatively low exposure to China at around 15% of revenues, according to IO Fund, similar to both AMD and Micron. But equipment manufacturers, they're the ones that have greater exposure. Almost half of ASML's business goes to China. Lam and Applied Materials also face significant risk, which really makes the administration's efforts to contain China's AI ambitions a real high-stakes game with billions hanging in the balance. But none of this is expected to be imminent in, let's say, the next month or so.
And that is NVIDIA, of course, whether it stabilizes technology and some of the selling or only adds to it. How are you thinking about it?
So I talk to people like Dan Ives about the topic, and I talk to people who aren't necessarily huge bulls on NVIDIA, but the one thing everybody seems to agree on is that commentary is going to be way more important than the magnitude of the beat. Of course, like, both are important, but I really feel that we've got the first leg of the stool we got was when all the Mag 7 names reported earlier this month, and every one of them said they were either sticking to their guidance on CapEx or raising it, which I thought was probably a really good reason for the market hanging in as well as it did during earnings season. We did not get like a sell the news, even though a lot of those stocks were up big. So that was important. The next leg of the stool that you're going to get, I think, is Jensen Huang's commentary on a go-forward basis. And when you think about what the past earnings reports results have been and whether or not they've correlated to a rally in the stock or a sell-off in the stock, it's so all over the map that even if I gave you, the proverbial you, anyone watching the show, even if I gave you the number, you could not use the last 8 quarters to predict up 5%, down 10%. It's literally impossible. So let's just focus on the numbers themselves for a moment as a level set, because I want people to understand how incredibly this company is still expected to report. 38.2 billion in revenue. That would be a 73% year-over-year top-line growth number. If they exceed that, it could be 80. We have no way of knowing. EBIT should be 24.6. That's up 66%. Earnings per share should be 85 cents. That would be a 64% annual gain. So if you think about just like how monumental this stock is in terms of its size in the S&P, its size in the NASDAQ, how meaningful its commentary is for the share prices of the next 50 largest companies, it's definitely a big event. Some would call it a potentially market clearing event. I would just say if you are too big going into this number, not just on NVIDIA, but on any of the other names in the AI trade, if you are too big, you got one last chance to do something about it. If you can't withstand a 10 to 15% drawdown from today because there's an adverse reaction, you can do something about it right now. And that's really the best thing I can tell you going into that number, which, of course, I'll be paying close attention to as well as the commentary.
Yeah, of course you will. Jim will be, too. Barclays calls it a crucial moment for equities. Wolf says it could change market sentiment. I think that's what we're alluding to in having this conversation, given where sentiment seems to be. Tom Lee says the earnings will be key in determining if the pullback proves to be only a quote-unquote flesh wound before the markets stabilize. What do you think?
I think all of that is true. I think this is a very, very important moment for the market, particularly in a wobbly market for momentum and tech and AI names. Here's what I think. I think they're probably going to beat the numbers, and this is queuing off of what Josh just said. I think the guidance will be just fine. And who knows how the market's going to respond, because as Josh pointed out, for the last several quarters, you've had fabulous numbers, fabulous guidance, and it's been all over the map, mostly down. But more to the point, while I think this can support the market in the short term, I recently trimmed the stock, and I did that on the belief not that 2025 is going to be bad for NVIDIA. I think it's going to be fabulous. But I think in 2026 that some of these little rumblings you're hearing right now, things like Microsoft announcing that it's, or Cowen saying that Microsoft is pulling back on data center leases, maybe there's validity to DeepSeek, that some of these things will come home to roost. Let me put this into perspectives with numbers, just as Josh did. Earnings for the full year fiscal year 25, ending in January 31st, going to be up over 100%. This year, ending January 31st, 26, will be up 50%. At 30 times forward earnings, the stock is attractively priced. The problem is not this year, it's next year. The growth rates have to come down.
Okay, so the numbers are going to be one thing. The call is going to be another. And then what may be an even bigger event, because it's going to be a one-on-one interview. It's a CNBC special report. It is tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. when John Fort interviews Jensen Huang. He's going to ask all the questions that you need to know about, obviously, on the other side of the earnings report. On what it means for the hyperscalers quickly, the former J.P. Morgan chief market strategist, Marko Kolanovic, has posted on social media, the next AI race will be how quickly can companies cut committed AI capex. Let's see what NVIDIA has to say. Let's see what they have to say about all the capex that the hyperscalers are spending on its products. It's going to be a huge event tomorrow afternoon.
Our next guest has been watching the market action around NVIDIA. Let's bring in with his predictions for the earnings tomorrow and the ripple effect, potentially Bob Sloan. He's a managing partner at S3. Bob, it's good to have you. So read the tea leaves, at least as of now, about 24 hours out.
So I think NVIDIA encapsulates the real conundrum for every investor, which is NVIDIA is such a large component of every index, and it's bigger than the market cap of, I think, every single country ex Japan. So when are things indexed and correlated? and when are they not? And I think tomorrow what you're going to see when you look at short interest and you look at it technically, so look at it in terms of support and resistance, you're going to see that NVIDIA has sold off, but short interest has come down quite a bit. It floats between 280 million shares and 260 million shares. It's more towards the support, and we think you're going to see a pop tomorrow.
Bob, where do you see most of the short interest coming from? Are these active funds, hedge funds? Is it people hedging as to kind of owning some of the other Mag 7? Do you have any color through that?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that the market has really changed since 5 years ago. 5 years ago, you had a lot of amazingly concentrated bets, and you had all these hedge funds blowing up. No one trades that way anymore. And NVIDIA is the marketplace. And we know that by looking at the holders structure. 70% of the ownership of NVIDIA is indexed. So if you look at the ownership structure, 70% is indexed. What's shorting against it? People are using NVIDIA not to short NVIDIA. It has nothing to do with NVIDIA. It has everything to do with shorting the rest of the market cheaply and efficiently. So it's become a risk management play rather than a play on the company itself.
So a decent level of short interest, even though you think, Bob, we could see a pop tomorrow. I know you said It is the whole market based on ownership, but Jordan Klein over at Mizuho was saying this morning he thinks NVIDIA may not even matter at this point because we've gotten all these data points through earnings where a lot of the software names, large cap and small cap, just haven't been trading that well. Look at how weak some of the kind of energy names are in the AI space, for instance. Do you think he has a point?
Yeah, I think he does. If you look at some of the ETFs, for example, you look at SPY, you look at IWM, you look at the Qs, every one of those is bearish. But it just so happens that in the short term, NVIDIA will have a pop tomorrow. When we see short interest declining, covering's happening, and when it bounces off the resistance level of short interest and the market declines, that's generally a bullish short-term signal.
Speaking of NVIDIA, we can look at shares down about 1.5% over fresh concerns about U.S. export restrictions. I have to say fresh concerns, even though if you're an investor, you know that these concerns have been looming for quite some time. They're still selling these H20 AI chips to China, but with demand spiking, there's fear that those will be next on the chopping block. NVIDIA is pushing back hard, arguing these export rules won't improve U.S. security. So with all of this uncertainty, analysts expect NVIDIA's guidance to rise, but maybe not as much as bulls had hoped, but likely still adding at least $2 billion, which isn't chump change. Scott.
Christina, thanks. Back to you soon. Christina Partsinevelos. Let's bring in now the Dean of Valuation, Aswath Damodaran of NYU Stern School of Business, is here with us at Post 9. It's great to have you here in person.
Great to be back.
So when you think about NVIDIA, the stock really hasn't traded well into the print, which is unusual in and of itself. But how do you see it today?
No, in September, when they came out with that bad earnings report, I valued them about $90 before the election, before the market downturn, and they were trading at 108. Today, they're trading at 128. So in terms of perspective, even with the beating they've taken in the last few weeks, the stock is still $20 higher than it was in September of 2024. So I think that at that time, I said the stock is a great company, but I don't see how you can get to $120, $130 per share.
Still?
No, I think that's still, what I said then will still hold. They don't have the capacity in terms of generating earnings and cash flows to sustain a $3 trillion market cap. So I think that still stands. And I think as the earnings report comes out tomorrow, my expectation is going to be a lot like September, a replay of September, where they will beat analyst expectations, but the market's going to be disappointed because the market seems to have set expectations higher than what analysts are seeing for the company.
Well, they would say, Professor, have you seen the CapEx numbers of these hyperscalers, what they say they're going to spend? And a large part of that, if not the majority, is going to go to us. Yeah. And we know that it is. And you pay a little bit more for future growth like we're going to give you where you can't get anywhere else.
Now, if you back out from the market cap, what their break even has to be in terms of revenues, it's about $500 billion in revenues. So even if you bring in all of the spending by Meta and Microsoft, that still gets you to maybe $300 billion, $350 billion. The market is actually building in a surplus over and above that of other people coming into the game and spending immense amounts. So this is not a question of, people are spending more than expected. That CapEx spending was already there in September. It scaled up. With DeepSeek, the question is, are there other people who might have entered the game who are not going to enter the game now because their response is, I don't need those NVIDIA chips. For what I'm doing, I can get there with much cheaper chips.
You think that's a new risk? Have you been thinking about it differently since the DeepSeek day?
No, in fact, I revalued it right after the DeepSeek.
You did? You think it's that profound of a change?
My value dropped by about $10 because in my view, what it does is it reduces the total size of the segment of the AI market that needs high-powered chips and immense amounts of data. Because whether DeepSeek is a fake or whether it's going to pass by, what it opened people's eyes to, not all AI products and services need these incredibly powerful chips and huge amounts of data and huge data centers that you can get there with much cheaper devices. And I think for many companies, when they look at the AI products and services they have to develop, they don't need this high-powered stuff. They don't need to spend the tens of billions of dollars up front. So I think that's the real worry you have to have as an NVIDIA investor, is whether those people will now hold back and buy cheaper chips and build cheaper centers.
Did you, at the same time, while downgrading, for lack of a better word, NVIDIA, did you upgrade something else?
Not yet, because I think what this is going to do is it's going to commoditize the product and service business, the AI product. We're all going to see more AI stuff because it's going to be cheaper and easier to deliver it. But I'm not sure any of us is going to be willing to pay for most of this stuff, because I look at the AI stuff that I'm being offered as a consumer, and my reaction, it's neat, it's cute, but I'm not paying $5 a month or $10 a month. It's different, I think, in the business AI segment. That's where the NVIDIA chips and the big data will continue to prosper. I don't see anybody benefiting from the commoditizing of the rest of the AI business, because it's going to be free stuff that everybody gets and nobody's able to make money off.
Before I let you go on that note, is tomorrow a clearing event with NVIDIA, getting the earnings out of the way? And does that ease some of the unsettled feeling around tech?
Well, NVIDIA always holds huge sway for two reasons. One is it's the second biggest stock in the land, so definitionally it carries so much market cap. I also think it is really it is the anchor point of the AI narrative more broadly. I always say you have people who come on the show have forgotten more about the micro fundamentals of NVIDIA than I will ever know. It seems those who are kind of the black belts who I speak to, of course, table stakes is a beaten guide. And the question is, do they address, for the first time in kind of a post-DeepSeek world, do they address the cyclical impulse to spend by the hyperscalers? My guess is they will continue to demonstrate huge demand for compute.
Last question.
Welcome back. Little orphan Annie would say we're only a day away from NVIDIA's highly anticipated earnings report. We're going to break down those numbers for you tomorrow right here on Overtime. And joining us now with what to expect is Melius Research Head of Technology Research, Ben Reitzes. Ben, big quarter for NVIDIA, given the questions that have been out there about growth. Is it the guidance? Is it the color on demand? What's going to matter the most?
I think what's going to matter most, and great to see you, by the way, John, is what they say about the year, because there's a product transition to Blackwell, and that could impact the guidance for the April quarter. So the street is looking for between 10 and 11% sequential growth each quarter after that. We got to hear about a big ramp, and that could satisfy investors. So, I would urge NVIDIA to give a little color beyond 1Q, because that could lack the upside, and we'll have to see how they feel about demand after that. And I think they'll say it's very strong. The other thing, John, just really quick, is that the quarter that just ended you probably benefited from a lot of buy-in ahead of tariffs and potential bans in China, with a 10-digit, a meaningful number into China. And we'll have to see what they say about export controls. That's a big issue. That's a wild card. Hopefully he gives some insight on what his conversations with the Trump administration have been. And frankly, those are tough to predict.
The rumor mills and whispers around NVIDIA products have started to remind me of Apple back in the day, and how, it would swing based on, are they going to do this? Are they not going to do this? Is this going to be late? I mean, it's becoming something unto itself. What is it that you actually pay attention to, latch on to as an investor when there are all these headlines about reading into what Satya Nadella may or may not have said about whether they have enough of the chips?
Well, there's so many things. I mean, this does remind me of the bubble, but it's on steroids. I mean, there is a data point, a podcast, a rumor every 5 minutes, and half the day I feel like I'm corralling the news flow. But with regard to NVIDIA, which is at the center of it, I think what you got to care about is the North Star. Are we moving to AI factories that replace a lot of the software and the way we do things? today, and I think we are. And I think that you are seeing these reasoning models that take much more compute. So over time, we should see the market digest some of these innovations with the reasoning models, and they are going to create up to a 10-fold increase very quickly with regard to compute resources. And NVIDIA should be the primary beneficiary. So we want to see that he's got the visibility that goes out a year. I want to hear that he's got a year out or multi-quarters, like he said before, and I want to hear conviction about sequential growth through the year. That's what I care about. And gross margin, obviously, could be the wild card with regard to tariffs.
How important is NVIDIA to the universe of companies that you cover right now? How much should investors think about that, even beyond NVIDIA's results impact on the company itself?
John, NVIDIA is the North Star. We reinvented our coverage when we came back in the business a few years ago with NVIDIA as the North Star. We thought this would be the center of the universe, and it certainly is. It is the most important data point for the entire space, everyone, including companies that at times are a little bigger than them, like Microsoft, even Apple, a lot of the AI stuff. But yeah, obviously Dell, Supermicro, and a few of the cloud folks. But what Jensen's vision is and how folks are using not only his chips, his software, and he's got to create the business, John. He's got to lay out a vision that actually folks follow. And that's the key. And if he's seeing sequential growth, and obviously his margins are okay and in that, then that really bodes well for the rest of the industry. It means increased cloud demand.
Okay. We'll see. We'll see what they report. Ben Reitzes, it's always great to have your perspective.
Take care.
All this, of course, NVIDIA is reporting earnings tomorrow. For what to expect, let's bring in Fast Money friend Gene Munster. He's a managing partner of Deepwater Asset Management. Gene, always great to see you.
Hello.
Hello. Wedbush is saying that they're looking for a $2 billion beat and a $2 billion raise. That's what the market's expecting. Do you think they deliver? Expectations are so
Melissa.
high.
Yeah, no, I think that they will deliver on that, in part because supply has improved meaningfully over the last month to 2 months. And so that really is the bogey, that kind of 1.8 to 2 billion beat for the quarter. I would mention that I think there's something bigger at play here, and just to kind of shortcut what to look for when these numbers come out. Guy just mentioned the gross margin number. That's important, but I think what's even more important is that we're going to see two press releases that come out. One, the earnings, and second, a letter from their CFO. In that letter, it will likely be some commentary about what is the demand, how far they're out with the supply-demand equilibrium related to Blackwell. And I suspect that they're going to say we're 4 quarters out, basically through all of 2020, calendar 25. They're going to be essentially sold out of Blackwell. If that language is in there, I think that is going to be a reassuring comment for AI investors. If they maintain that it's just several quarters out, like she said in last quarter's letter, I think that's going to send kind of a shockwave. So that's probably the piece that I think investors are going to dig most into related to the NVIDIA earnings.
Do you think they address DeepSeek?
Yes, I mean, it's going to come up, and I think that Tim had some comments about, like, these hyperscalers and what they're spending. They will reiterate that, and I think that I just want to emphasize a piece related to DeepSeek relative to what the hyperscalers said. Going into DeepSeek, just before it came out, the hyperscalers were expected to increase their CapEx spend by 20% in calendar 25. Now it's expected to be just above 40%. That's a meaningful move higher. And so I think that really is important. And I think the substance of that, and we may not see that in how NVIDIA trades on Thursday morning, but I think the substance of this is that the AI hardware trade will last longer than most investors expect, and understand kind of the apprehension about the funk that the AI trade is right now. But if what these hyperscalers are saying is true, companies like NVIDIA should have more upside throughout this year than investors are currently anticipating.
So, Gene, what's the other side of that, though? So I hear you, and I kind of agree with everything you just said, but DeepSeek introduced a level of at least uncertainty around what spend means, and who benefits from DeepSeek, and have you gotten bullish because of DeepSeek in other directions?
Yeah, I think that I'll say what consensus is that consensus is DeepSeek has been a positive for AI hardware. it's NVIDIA stock hasn't reflected it. Market's not buying it, but that's what I think that's the substance of this. I think when it comes to the cost of AI inference, it's going to go through the floor. Sam Altman said after DeepSeek that they expect the cost of tokens to go down 10 to 12x per year for their second-tier model. I mean, that's basically through the floor. And I think the third piece to this, if those two happen, we get this hardware build-out, we get the cost of compute or the cost of inference declining, I think you're going to see some just profound impacts. And so I'm still bullish on this market. I think that what we're seeing right now is a funk, and I think that we still got 2 great years left of this AI trade.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today and staying calm in this market. The S&P finished the day about 0.5% lower, and NVIDIA finished the day 2.8% lower. We got 2 pieces of news about NVIDIA this morning. First, Bloomberg reported that the administration is considering tougher export controls on AI chips to China. This, of course, put pressure on NVIDIA stock today, a day when the stock was already going to be volatile as market participants prepare for NVIDIA earnings tomorrow. And this story from Bloomberg overshadowed a second piece of news about NVIDIA today. Reuters published a story saying that NVIDIA H20 orders have surged in China as companies adopt DeepSeek's AI models. I want to say a couple things about these topics. As I've said many times on this channel following the DeepSeek sell-off, I don't think DeepSeeks or one will be a problem for NVIDIA, and I actually think it will be a good thing for NVIDIA in the long run. And so far, that appears to be the case as DeepSeeks or one is actually helping to stoke demand for NVIDIA's chips. On the topic of tariffs, I think that over the long term, NVIDIA will be fine regardless of whether there are tariffs or not. That being said, this whole situation is causing some volatility in the short term. The president has said multiple times that there will be tariffs on chips and that those tariffs will be on top of any reciprocal tariffs. Now, the question is when the tariffs will be implemented and how much will the tariffs be? And this brings me to the one concern I have as we head into NVIDIA's earnings tomorrow. I'm slightly concerned that the threat of tariffs may result in NVIDIA giving softer guidance than they otherwise would. We've been told that these tariffs are on the way, and so NVIDIA will likely try to factor that into their forward-looking projections. And so that is not ideal in the short term. At the same time, Blackwell is currently ramping in volume, and that does bode well for NVIDIA's guidance. We'll see what happens tomorrow. To be completely honest with you, I'm actually more optimistic about the quarters that NVIDIA should report sometime in May and August, because those are the quarters in which Blackwell earnings should really start to show up in a substantial way. Even so, I do think NVIDIA will report great numbers this Wednesday. I just don't know how market participants will react in the short term. With that in mind, what should you do ahead of earnings? Of course, I am not a financial advisor, and so I cannot tell you what to do. At the same time, here are some thoughts to consider that I think may be helpful to you. First, ask yourself this question. Is this a long-term investment that I intend to hold for multiple years, or is this a short-term trade? Once you have a clear answer to that question, it makes the decision-making process much easier. For me personally, if I'm holding a long-term investment that I intend to hold for the next 5, 10, 20 years, then I would rather hold through earnings, listen to the earnings call, and take some time to go through the results. And as long as the company is still making great progress forward and there are no substantial negative changes to the fundamentals of the company, then I have no reason to sell. It's that simple. On the other hand, if this is a short-term trade, then that is a more complex situation. This stock could very easily swing up or down 8+% tomorrow after earnings. And so for me personally, that is not a risk that I would want to take given that I don't know what the results of the report will be. And I have no idea how market participants will react to the results. I do not like to hold trades through earnings. Long-term investments are completely different, but when it comes to short-term trades, I prefer to not hold those through an earnings report. And this goes for any stock, not just NVIDIA. Another thing to consider if you're trading options is the potential for what's called implied volatility crush, or IV crush for short. It is very common for implied volatility to skyrocket leading up to an earnings report, juicing up option premiums, and then for that implied volatility to fall off a cliff the very next day after earnings, pulling down option premiums with it. IV crush is no joke, and it happens very often following NVIDIA earnings. So that is something to consider. Again, I'm not telling you what to do. I just think these are important things to consider right now if you hold a position in NVIDIA. I'm not a financial advisor, and if you need help with your situation, then consider reaching out to a certified financial advisor to help you in your unique situation. Now, going back to this earnings report, I have no idea what the results will be, and I have no idea how market participants will react in the short term. I'm slightly concerned about NVIDIA's guidance given the looming threat of tariffs, and I'm actually more optimistic about the quarters NVIDIA should report later this year in May and August. I'm also not concerned about the TD Cowen note about Microsoft cutting data center leases. I talked about that topic in yesterday's NVIDIA video, so feel free to check that out if you want. But those are some of my short-term thoughts about NVIDIA. From a long-term perspective, I'm optimistic as Blackwell is ramping in volume. All of the hyperscalers have thus far maintained or raised their 2025 CapEx numbers, and we have GTC on the horizon after earnings. Speaking of GTC, it's scheduled for March 17th through the 21st with a keynote from CEO Jensen Huang on March 18th. This is the event where we are likely to get news about NVIDIA's products in the data center, which is where NVIDIA makes the majority of their revenue. Be sure to mark your calendars for that event. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.